This is Dear Strategy, episode 128. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real questions from real people in real companies, just like yours. Welcome back, strategy creators, to another great episode. This is episode 128. And let me just get this right out of the way. Those of you who are regular listeners to the show are probably asking yourselves, or have been asking yourselves, where have I been for the last 2.5 to 3 months? I know you've been thinking about that almost every day, so I just have to answer it for you. Everything is cool. No worries if you were worried. I'm sure probably nobody was. But anyway, there would be no reason to be because things just got a little bit busy. And if you remember, I said at the end of last year, that's the last episode that dropped, I think the end of December, just before Christmas. And I said on that show that we were going to take some time to regroup a little bit, re-strategize. We had changed our format, or I'd say experimented with the format for the last year, all throughout 2020. We were playing with this idea of alternating strategy stories with strategy questions. And that worked out. I think we had some really good, and lively episodes in there. But going into this year, wanted to really see, was that working? Was it getting us what we wanted? And kind of think about what we needed for the show going forward. And so I'm going to announce all of that. Like I said, I've had some time to think and plan and re-strategize. So I'm going to announce that here today, but I'm going to do that under the answer of today's question, which may well be the last formal question that is featured on the show, but I'll get to all of that in just a second. So anyway, here is today's question. Dear Strategy, what is the single most important common element that you see in successful strategy executions? So hopefully you're putting this together, right? But if this is going to be the last formal question, that's a great one to end on, right? Because I think that kind of summarizes all the questions that we've had so far. And let me answer it in a word or a sentence, right? And that answer is the most successful common element that I see, or the most important common element that I see in successful strategy execution, is the ability to pivot. The ability to pivot. And I've seen this time and time again. So many times, whether it's companies, individuals, people, whatever, put together a strategy. They work hard to get all the information. They do their due diligence. They take their time to get everything right. And then they go to execute the strategy. And sometimes that execution doesn't work, or sometimes things change. In fact, almost all the times things will change, right? Those of you who've been following the process know very well the process is that you would base your strategy on analysis that you do about your customers, your company, your competitors, right? Take all these different inputs, you add assumptions because you can't always know everything that's going on. And then you use that information to base your strategy on. Very, very simple, very straightforward process. But in that is built in the fact that not everything that you analyze is going to be right. Not everything you assume is going to be right. So there's this huge element of, as you execute your strategy, things are inevitably going to change, right? Or they're not going to be correct from what you assumed. And that means that you have to retrench, you have to refresh, you have to think about, did this work, did it not? Sometimes all of your analysis is right, or most of it's right, and just the strategy that you thought would work, it didn't get you the goals, the objectives, whatever it is that you were thinking you would get. And so what you need to do is you need to go back to the drawing board, sometimes in real time, sometimes very frequently, right? And keep tweaking until you get things right. And I think a lot of times the reason that people don't do that is, one, once they put together all the work that it takes to develop a strategy, sometimes they get married to it, right? It's almost like, I've done all of this research. I presented it all the way up and down the food chain. It's a lot of work to go back and redo even a small piece of it, right? Another reason I think that this happens, and I think this one is almost more common, is that it's almost a sign of failure, right? If you put a strategy together, you've made assumptions, you said this is what was going to work and this is what it was going to get me. And then you find it's not doing that. Kind of admitting that to both yourself and to whoever else you presented the strategy to, that's tough, right? That's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes you might fear for your job if you're in a professional environment and or you don't have your own company, whatever it is. You presented your strategy up and down the line. You got investment, you got resources, whatever else, and it wasn't completely right. And I'll tell you, part of that has to do with corporate culture. There's not a lot of room in many corporate cultures for that type of flexibility or quote unquote failure, right? But sometimes it also has to do with our own egos, our own fear. And so all of those things cause us many times to go forward with a strategy that just isn't working. I mean, maybe it worked before and it's not working now, or maybe it never worked, but we just continue to go forward with it. And that's not always a good thing. Well, that's never a good thing, I would say. So I would say that the companies that are able to pivot, the people that are able to pivot, the ones that can recognize, hey, things change and I have to change with them, or things weren't right to begin with, and I have to now take these new inputs that I've gotten and I have to, refresh whatever my actions were. Those are the people that have the most success because, again, every single time, some condition, some assumption is going to change. If you don't change with it, then your strategy will ultimately fail. If you do change with it, eventually your strategy is going to succeed because you're going to keep going until you get it right. So I think it's very appropriate to talk about that now for two reasons. One, it's now been almost a year to the day, right, that we've, been in this COVID lockdown, and the world has changed unbelievably. I know my entire business has pivoted, right, from I was traveling almost every week, going out, doing classes, live in person, consulting, coaching, things of that nature. One day, the plug was pulled and, everything had to change. And what I had to do was refresh my strategy, refresh my offerings, talk to my customer base and say, what do we need to do? It was a big risk that there would be no business, right? They would just stop doing business, especially since the majority of my business is workshops and training. But I was able to present a different strategy, present a different way. And I didn't get it right completely out of the gate. I had to pivot with that and so forth. And now here I am a year later and I have a successful business and I'm at the point of saying, well, now what do I want that business to look like going forward, right? And here's where I think it's really important for companies to embrace this concept of pivoting, because I see and talk to so many companies who are just relying on the fact that, well, once everyone has the vaccine and COVID is over, everything's going to go back to the way it was. And I'm here to tell you, I just do not think that's going to be the case. I just don't think that's going to be the case. Not because COVID is going to last forever. Clearly, that's not going to happen. That's never been the case in any time in our history, that a virus or a bacteria or a disease lasts forever. But what has happened is that in the last year, we've all learned to work differently. We've learned to change the way that we do business, the way that we interface with each other, and the way that we interact with one another. And we're at a very unique time in history right now because that change can be drastic, right? 100 years ago, if we weren't, face to face, there wasn't a whole lot of ways that we can make up that difference. So once things, got back to normal, quote unquote, they actually got back to the way they were before because there was no technology to enable a gap filler, right? But today, that's not the case. And in fact, I would argue that we were doing a lot of things before COVID that we were just miserable with, that many of us were questioning, like, why are we doing this? Why are we commuting every day to work, spending an hour each way on this commute? Why are we going into work in places where we don't want to work? The traffic is enormous right now. The population has never been larger, right? So we've got all these different barriers that we're saying, like, why do we even have to do this? Why do we have to cram ourselves into, airline seats that are far too small for human beings? Why do we have to go to movie theaters or, even regular theaters and go into seats that were designed back in the late 1800s and early 1900s and terribly uncomfortable and sit there for 3 hours when maybe there's a different way that's more comfortable, right? And COVID caused us all to become much more familiar and much more comfortable with these different ways. And so now when the restrictions get lifted and, things get back to quote unquote normal from an environmental standpoint, you have to ask yourself, are things going to go back to the way they were from a business standpoint? Are we still going to be getting on planes, trains, and automobiles? Are we still going to be commuting to, locations where we really don't have to do that? Are the tools going to be the same as they were before COVID? Or are we now going to be taking these new ways that we've learned to do things and integrating those into our day-to-day business life? Well, I think it's the latter. And I think companies that don't embrace the fact that it could be the latter, or at least the possibility that it could be the latter, then I think those companies are going to have a lot of trouble. So that's really the crux of it, right? Pivot, and make sure that you don't just stick to the way things were or the way things were designed or the way you thought that they would turn out, because they almost never do. And even if you do make an assumption that, things are going to get back to the way that they were, open yourself up to the possibility that you could be wrong, right? Don't just keep waiting for it. If it doesn't seem to be going that way, pivot. Or maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe things are going to get back exactly the way they were, and everything that I've based my strategies on and all those assumptions were incorrect. And guess what I have to do? Pivot. So that's the answer, right? That's the answer. And I hope that people can take that and really, just take that one word and do something really, really positive with it going forward. Okay. So what about this big announcement that I have, and what have I been doing for the last 2.5 months? So I'll try and keep this as brief as possible because I don't want to bore anybody with all the details. But let's just say that we've been doing this show for about 5 years now. And when I started the show, it really was started as a resource to provide people a place they can come and ask questions about strategy in a non-intimidating forum, right? Because a lot of times I think people are in business, they're expected to know the subject of strategy, they're expected to know the definitions, and it's almost like an admission of failure if you don't know that. So I've seen too many business practitioners kind of nod their heads in saying, yeah, they know something when they really don't about this subject, right? And I think we've made the subject of strategy over the years very academic, right? It's almost like a badge of honor. It becomes a credential. And yet I've seen so many people that, go through the academic version of strategy and are not very effective strategists because that's only one way to approach it. Not to say that that's always the case. Sometimes it's very good to do it that way, but you could also approach strategy in a very intuitive way, more from your gut. And anywhere in between those extremes is perfectly valid, right? And I wanted people to feel that and know that and have a chance to practice some of that themselves. So I think over the last 5 years, we've accomplished that goal. But there is a finite number of things that you could talk about, right? There's a finite number of basic strategy questions that could be asked, which is why last year we started pivoting it into stories and, situations that you run into in your day-to-day life. I had a little fun with it that way. But I really felt like it's now time to say, okay, we've accomplished that first goal. And now what do we do, right? What do we want to do going forward? What do we want this to be? And I've really come to realize who my audience is for this show as well. It's not a terribly large audience, right? It's, people find the show and, that could present business development opportunities and more importantly than that, educational opportunities for the people that find it. So all that's great. And I want to continue to provide that. But for the most part, this show has become a resource for my clients, my customers, people that I work with, who, can go and learn a little bit additional outside of my classes and the workshops and the things that I teach and so forth. So there's a big element of that as well. So what I really felt that I wanted to do going forward with this show is pivot again, right? And really turn the show less into basic strategy questions. I think we answered just about everything we could there, and turn it more towards, cases, right? Situational cases, still answering questions, but more around, hey, if you're in this particular situation or you run into this situation, here's some things that you might want to think about as you're approaching this problem. Here's some potential solutions, some potential ways that you can go about this situation. So it's really more about how do you develop your strategies. And when I talk about cases, I'm not talking about academic case studies, right? I'm not talking about, going through what McDonald's did or what Toys R Us, what happened to Toys R Us or things of that nature. Like that's not what I'm talking about. We'll save that for the universities. I'm talking about real life situations that you might run into, specific situations that you might encounter when you're developing your strategy. And, some of the ways that you might think about going about solving that. And I'm going to take that out of my own experience. Obviously, I'm not going to be sharing, what happened with, any specific company or any specific company that I've worked with, but more, common kind of situations that I see and common ways of approaching those situations that I've found have worked effectively. So that's really where we're going in the future. So talking about the frequency of the show now, this is not going to be a bi-weekly format anymore for a couple of reasons there as well. Number one is I want this to evolve as on an as needed basis, right? So as people, ask me about certain situations, if I hear common themes that I want to feature on the show, I'm going to go ahead and do an episode. Or maybe I ran into a situation that I think is really pertinent and really interesting to share, and I'll go ahead and do an episode on that. So it's going to be more of an as needed basis. I think that's going to equate to anywhere from 6 to 10 shows a year, something like that. But it's not going to necessarily be on a regular schedule. So keep us on the subscribe, button or whatever happens on your podcast aggregators, and just check, right? Occasionally you'll see a new episode drop. But again, I think you'll see probably in the 6 to 10 episodes per year type of a range. That's important for me because obviously I have a business to run. I have a lot of things that I'm busy with. And so trying to maintain this schedule of podcast and blog every 2 weeks, it has been challenging. I'm not going to lie. So this kind of takes some of that pressure off. But I also think that I don't want to force a situation to be talked about every, 2 weeks or whatever it is, because then things could get stale or boring. So it's going to be more as I see a situation that's worth sharing, or if you ask a question, which you'll still be able to do, then we'll do an episode on that particular situation. That's pretty much how we intend to write it. So with that said, still continue to reach out. If you have a question, a situation that you want to analyze, a question about how do you develop this part of your strategy? I've run into this and what do you think I should do? That's really something we'd be interested in hearing about and seeing if that's something that we want to feature in a future episode. We may even decide to have guests on in the future. Now we're going to stay with our policy of hiding names and, not talking about specific companies. This is not what we do on this show. For a lot of different reasons, not the least of which would be client confidentiality and making sure that we don't run afoul of any, certain company or whatever. But at the same time, we do want to feature real situations. And so to hear real voices talking about those real situations are great. So I'm going to keep the format open to maybe people come on and ask a question and we have a discussion, or maybe I have a strategy expert on and we talk about that way as well. So we're going to kind of keep that really light and ever changing. So we'll see how that all goes in the future as well. So what all of that means is I want to hear from you. Please go out to dearstrategy.net. You can use that same contact form that you've been using before and just let us know what you think. Tell me what you think about this new format, if this was going to work for you, if you have any comments, or if you have questions or a situation that you want me to talk about. Go ahead and share that as well, and we'll see if we can't put that into a future episode. Also, please don't forget to go to the website of the company that I own and that I founded, Strategy Generation Company. You can go there by visiting strategygeneration.com. You'll see when you go to that website that we've just revamped all of our products and so forth based on this repivoting that we talked about. So there's a lot of new things there to go and learn and discover. We hope that you'll go do that. Again, strategygeneration.com. While you're doing all that, please don't forget to make time for the plan, and we'll see you back here on a completely new and revamped version of Dear Strategy. Thanks again for joining. We'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caporelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.